President, you said that the ISIS fighters who escaped had been recaptured, but today your top envoy said that's not true, that they don't know where they are.
And that was, of course, US President Donald Trump speaking on the Syrian civil war there, speaking from the Oval Office in Washington. And for more on this, let's go now live to DC to our correspondent Shayna Estulin, who is standing by. Shayna, you've just been listening in on that speech there by US President Donald Trump. Tell me, what are the main takeaways there for you?
Wow, there's a lot. I made a lot of notes because there's a lot of fact-checking here. You know, the president ended his statement praising Erdogan, Turkey's president, but we just heard from the administration's top person on Syria who testified before Congress, who said that Turkey committed war crimes. So clearly Turkey not behaving in a way that should be praised. The president also criticized Obama for not honoring the red line warning that President Obama made, which, to be fair, a lot of people criticized Obama for that. The president then mentioned how he fired missiles at Assad for using chemical weapons. Well, after those missiles were fired, Assad continued to use chemical weapons. The Trump administration has said that again. So it's not as if what the president did stopped the Assad regime from using chemical weapons. I think the main theme here was a full-throated message of isolationism. The president, as he's campaigned on, as he's spoken about during his time in the White House, is all about pulling the U.S. out of these conflicts in the Middle East. He said that if the U.S. were to get involved in this Turkish invasion, it would be tens of thousands of U.S. forces. But critics point out there were only a handful of U.S. forces there on the northern border between Turkey and Syria, and that was stopping Turkey from invading. So it was not a big commitment, and it was doing so much good. And essentially, this was a crisis that the president created and is now taking, well, he's saying it's a victory.
And Shayna, yes, he certainly did bring up a lot of topics there. Tell me, what kind of a response can we expect from that speech there in Washington?
Well, the president's supporters, as we've seen time and time again, will rush to his defense. And again, his base does like the idea of the U.S. getting out of these conflicts. The president also mentioned a strong immigration policy. He tied that to refugees coming to the United States. But we've seen up till now, and everything he said is not a surprise, we've seen up till now Republicans criticize the president, including Republican leadership, for abandoning the U.S. ally, the Kurds, the message that it sends to other allies in the region, namely Israel. So you can expect that Republicans will continue to criticize the president for that. But from the Democrats, too, you'll expect criticism that the president is rushing to pull U.S. forces in a very chaotic manner from the Middle East without thinking it through, without consulting with allies. Now, speaking of U.S. forces, you know, the plan at first was to bring the forces that were in Syria to Iraq, but Iraq says they don't want U.S. forces there. They're battling their own internal political divisions. There's a lot of pressure from Iran not to have U.S. forces in Iraq. So the thinking now is that U.S. forces will be in Iraq just for a temporary basis and then be brought back to the United States, which means that if ISIS regroups, you won't have that U.S. presence, the same type of U.S. presence that could rush in and combat ISIS that the president had promised would happen.
And we certainly will be expecting to hear these reactions pouring in very shortly. Shayna Estulin there in DC. Thank you so much for that. And for more, I'm joined here in the studio by former Israeli ambassador to France and Italy, Avi Pazner. Always a pleasure having you in.
Thank you.
And we also have our defence correspondent, Daniel Semach. Gentlemen, one thing I do want to bring up is Trump announcing the lifting of all sanctions there on Turkey. Let's take a little listen to what he had to say on that.
I've therefore instructed the Secretary of the Treasury to lift all sanctions imposed on October 14th in response to Turkey's original offensive moves against the Kurds in Syria's northeast border region. So the sanctions will be lifted unless something happens that we're not happy with. This was an outcome created by us, the United States, and nobody else, no other nation. Very simple.
And gentlemen, that certainly was one of the main announcements there in that speech from the president. Tell me, what kind of an impact will this lifting of sanctions on Turkey have?
Absolutely nothing, because there were no sanctions on Turkey. There was talk about sanctions. I think they sanctioned 3 of the ministers in Turkey, or they said they would put some tariff on imported steel, which is negligible. There were no sanctions on Turkey. But this is a psychological boost, again, for Erdogan. And I saw the kind words Trump had for Erdogan during
certainly.
all this announcement. And this is in order to hide the strategical defeat of the United States. This withdrawal had catastrophic consequences on the Middle East stability and on the American capability to do something about it. Finished. America is not here anymore. I mean, what you saw today is a conference press about isolationism in its worst form. I don't care what's going on in the world. We have a nice economy. We have the best economy. It's Obama's fault. Now I get our boys back. I mean, this is a disaster from the point of view of American strategy. Even the President France says so. His Republican allies said so. I think, either he doesn't understand or he doesn't care. And he was talking to his constituency. I mean, when you are a miner in Tennessee, maybe you are very happy. The boys are back. But where is America? Where is the United States? It's part in the world. Why is America a great power? Because it can influence other nations in the world. If you pull all Americans' assets, all American forces back to America, you will have nothing left. If you continue like that, you pull them from Saudi Arabia, from South Korea, from wherever they are. I mean, this is, I think, the worst American political and strategical defeat in a long, long time. And Trump was trying to explain what the inexplicable. You cannot explain that. You have to realize that he has a policy. Maybe he thinks it's good, or maybe he doesn't understand. America, what means America first? Means only America. It doesn't care about the rest.
Saying other people need to step in and fight instead of America. And on the subject of that, Daniel, we did hear the president there speaking on Turkey's offensive about the Kurds, saying that most of these ISIS militants who've escaped have been captured. But is that really the case? What do you make of what he had to say there? Well,
I mean, I'll touch on that, but I think generally speaking, it's interesting to look at the language that U.S. President Donald Trump made. First off of what one thing that Ambassador Pasner said, the fact that U.S. President Donald Trump said that the vicious events that unfolded needed to happen, that they needed to happen in order for these sides to reach an agreement. I think that there will be a great deal of skepticism and even opposition to that statement. Many would argue maybe it didn't need to happen. Maybe this international pressure on Turkey not to engage in this sort of offensive could have prevented it. Now, beyond that, he also kept backing off some of his statements. He was saying that Turkey would end fighting permanently, and then went on to say that obviously permanently in this area of the world means maybe something else. Then went on also to say that the sanctions would be lifted, but also said that if something happens that the U.S. doesn't like, they would be reimposed. So definitely backing off a lot of his statements, and that was the same when it came to the whole issue of Islamic State militants that escaped from those prisons, is that he understands that they were largely recaptured, that maybe a few have managed to escape, but that the Kurds have managed to fortify those jails. From what we understand, even from U.S. Secretary of Defense himself, that's not necessarily the case, as Shayna Estulin very pointedly pointed out earlier. So there are a lot of things here that that really shed an interesting light on the whole situation. That U.S. President Donald Trump trying to backpedal on some of the maybe more lofty promises and achievements that he was lauding, his own achievements, the U.S. achievements, as well as the team of U.S. top officials that went to Turkey to broker the U.S. brokered ceasefire, and then leading to this Turkish-Russian agreement, which is another issue in and of itself, Sarah.
And if I can comment on Daniel's about the Russian-Turkey agreement, this is a turnabout in our region. This gives the Russian really the role of the most important power, at least in Syria and maybe beyond, for the moment in Syria. And I think that Israel has to think very, very hard about that. It's not to neglect our ties with the United States. We are the prime allies of the United States. But we will have to maintain a good relationship with Russia. We have a good relationship. There is a good relationship, not the same as we have with the United States, but we will have to be very careful because they are now the dominant factor in Syria. And I see already that they are sending delegation to Saudi Arabia, the Russians, to Jordan, to Egypt. They are building their nuclear reactor. I think that Israeli policymakers, once they have formed the government, which may take some time, will have to think very hard how to adjust to this new reality.
And we also did hear from the president regarding these ISIS prisoners, suggesting maybe that Europe would take them in, that they would be tried in the countries in which they came from. But we've heard staunch comments coming from leaders of Europe saying, you're out there, we don't want you back, we will not have you back. What do you see happening here?
They don't want them. Not only do they not want them back, they have also cancelled their nationality. You know that in France, when you go to fight for Syria, you lose your French nationality. They cannot go back. I think this is one of the most ridiculous things to ask, that those terrorists go back to their country and there they can act with all the freedom they have in order to have terrorism. I think, you know, the whole speech was inconsistent with a real political approach and strategical approach. It was slogans here, slogans there. You'll be happy to re-elect me again next year.
And even regarding the ceasefire, we heard the president to come out to say that the ceasefire has held. It will be a permanent ceasefire, although we can't guarantee it will be a permanent ceasefire. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that there it's really, as we were discussing earlier, it's with each celebration of an achievement, there was a backpedaling of sorts, a step back taken, saying not permanent, safe zone, strange term. What does it mean, safe zone? This area isn't safe. Almost opening the door, leaving the door slightly ajar for the chance, not even rare chance, but for the chance that things don't remain stable and don't remain calm. Ultimately, we have a lot of time to pay attention to what's happening on the ground in Syria, whether the Kurds, like he claimed, that the commander Mazloub of the Kurdish SDF forces, that he was so thankful for saving tens of thousands of lives. I'd be very curious to hear what he has to say. And it's possible that he was saying something else.
I think, or Kurdish, yes.
So we'll see what he has to say, if he indeed has those comments, as U.S. President Donald Trump said that he will make an announcement soon.
Daniel Semak, Ambassador Avi Pazner, really appreciate you being in here to break it all down for me. Thank you so much. And we are going out for a short break, but when we come back, we'll have all of the latest on the Israeli politics drama with the leader of the Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz, about to receive the mandate from the president as he looks to form a coalition. Our correspondent is standing by in Jerusalem. Stay with us.
On Stateside, it's not just about delivering the news. It's about giving meaning to the news and doing so with clarity.
These families waiting to get into the country, how long will they be in detention?
Fact-based journalism, live breaking news, and stories right from where they happen.
This is Zimbabwe's Berlin Wall moment.
Because what happens around the rest of the world can have a huge impact on the United States, and what happens in the United States can have a huge impact on the rest of the world. That's Stateside.
Unflinching, outspoken, and to the point. The most complete coverage of the day's events. Weeknights, watch Crossroads for analysis, interviews, and reporting that connects us to the Middle East and the world. Watch Crossroads, 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I'm Jordana Miller at I-24 News. Join me for the Holy Land Uncovered, a look at this remarkable land filled with so much faith and history and archaeology.
Watch Holy Land Uncovered. only on I-24 News.
Our world is becoming increasingly connected. 6.5 million Wi-Fi enabled devices are now shipping every day. Global consumer internet traffic is growing exponentially, with 2.8 billion internet users consuming video at a breathtaking rate. We are creating breakthrough technologies that connect millions of people and billions of devices, and securing our place as the most trusted business in technology. We are Aeris, and we're redefining connectivity.
Thanks for staying with us here on I-24 News. Let's go now to Israeli politics, and the head of the Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz, is set to receive the mandate to try and form a governing coalition in just an hour's time. Now, this after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu handed that mandate back to President Reuven Rivlin after he was unable to complete the task. Now, it's not said to be any easier for Gantz, though. He has just 28 days to try and form a government, with kingmaker Avigdor Lieberman from the Israel Beitenu party announcing that he will not recommend any candidate to be Prime Minister, keeping the same stance as he did when Netanyahu had the mandate. Now, if a coalition can't be formed, then Israel may go to the third round of elections. And standing by for us in Jerusalem is our diplomatic correspondent, Ellie Hockenberg. Ellie, thanks for joining me. That mandate is expected to be handed to Benny Gantz in around an hour. Tell me, what can we expect?
Right, Sarah. So in about an hour, the Israeli President Reuven Rivlin and Blue and White Party leader Benny Gantz will take the podium right here behind me at the Israeli president's residence, and Gantz will officially receive the mandate to form a coalition. This is the first time in over a decade anyone other than Benjamin Netanyahu will be given this opportunity to form a government. But as you've mentioned, it will not be easy whatsoever. Two very important meetings taking place earlier today ahead of this official ceremony. First, the Blue and White Party leadership, Benny Gantz. Number 2, Yair Lapid, leader of the centrist Yesh Atid party. Number 3, Moshe Bogi Ya'alon, leader of the Telem party. And number 4, Gabi Ashkenazi. This leadership that is calling itself the cockpit met earlier in the day to make sure they're all on the same page. Let me just remind you, Sarah, the Blue and White Party is this political hybrid consisting of 3 different parties, so they want to make sure that facing those coalition negotiations, they're all on the same page in terms of the strategy they're about to take. Another very important meeting earlier today, the right-wing bloc convening once again at the Prime Minister's office here in Jerusalem, deciding to stick together as one unit, meaning the Likud party, the 2 right-wing parties, and the 2 ultra-Orthodox parties will conduct coalition negotiations as one bloc, as one unit, and not separately. And this is essentially the goal of Benny Gantz and the Blue and White Party, to try and divide and conquer, if you will, to hold bilateral negotiations with each and every faction, but the right-wing bloc securing its strength as one unit earlier in the day, and Benjamin Netanyahu confirming that the Likud party negotiating team will arrive tomorrow afternoon to meet the Blue and White coalition team to start discussions, but again representing the right-wing bloc as a whole, not just the Likud party.
And Ellie, let's talk about now Benny Gantz there. He will be handed that mandate very shortly. What goes on then if he fails? What happens there for Israeli voters?
Right, so Benny Gantz will have 28 days to try and exhaust all efforts to form a coalition. As discussed, the prospects of him succeeding are not very high, but then the ball will move to Parliament's court, and Parliament will have 21 days to try and rally support behind any lawmaker among the 120 lawmakers. It could be Netanyahu, it can be Gantz, it could be anyone else, will manage to receive the backing of 61 lawmakers. lawmakers. Then, if such a candidate will be found, the Israeli president will officially nominate him or her to be tasked with forming a government. 14 days will be allocated to try and do so again, only if such a candidate will be found. And if not, Sarah, Parliament will once again convene and decide to dissolve, and Israel, as you mentioned, will head to an unprecedented third election in 1 year.
Certainly all happening in Israeli politics. Ellie Hockenberg, always a pleasure. Thank you. Moving on, and the bodies of 39 people, including a teenager, have been found in the back of a truck in Essex in England in an industrial park. Now, the driver, a 25-year-old man from Northern Ireland, has been arrested on suspicion of mass murder. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he's appalled by the tragic incident. For now, the situation is under investigation. More in the next report.
This is where the police found them. Inside this truck. 39 dead bodies, one a teenager. A shocking sight for British police who found the truck in Essex, about 18 miles east of London.
A murder investigation was launched and the lorry driver, a 25-year-old man from Northern Ireland, was arrested on suspicion of murder and remains in police custody. At this stage, we have not identified where the victims are from or their identities, and we anticipate this could be a lengthy process.
The truck originated in Bulgaria and entered the UK over the weekend. Police discovered it overnight after emergency services were alerted. Investigations are now focused on identifying the 39 victims.
This is an unimaginable tragedy and truly heartbreaking. I know that the thoughts and prayers of all members are with those who lost their lives and their loved ones. I'm receiving regular updates, and the Home Office will work closely with Essex Police as we establish exactly what has happened.
The situation bears a resemblance to a case from August 2015 when 71 migrants were found dead in a refrigerator truck in Austria. Back then, a 31-year-old Bulgarian man was arrested as the head of a human smuggling ring with 2 Bulgarian drivers. British police has not commented on the similarities in the cases, but noted that the truck found in Essex on Wednesday started its journey in Bulgaria. More information is expected to come out in the following days. Bianca Zanini, i24 News.
And for more, let's now go live to London to our UK correspondent, Jonathan Sacerdoti, who is standing by. Jonathan, truly an awful story to break today. I understand that the police there in Britain have just held a press conference. What more are they telling you?
Yes, the police still not giving away too much about this investigation. They're still trying to identify the names of the victims, they say. Part of the problem, of course, though they don't mention this detail, is that if they are migrants who are being smuggled or trafficked into the country, it's quite often the case that they deliberately don't carry any identifying paperwork or material with them in order to be able to claim asylum in their destination country more thoroughly, more effectively. But in the meantime, what the police did say is that they're moving the lorry from the site where it was originally found and where it was being investigated, partly to aid them in the identification of the 39 victims, to give them, they said, more dignity in the process as well. But they are keeping that site closed. And of course, this is the lorry itself and where it was found are now the site of a complex murder investigation. So that is ongoing. They're still appealing to people for more information. If anybody has any information about the lorry, the driver, or particularly these people who've been found tragically dead inside the truck.
Yes, awful pictures we are seeing coming in there. Jonathan, tell me, how are people there in the United Kingdom reacting to this shocking news?
Well, it's a very sad piece of news. Obviously, the deaths of 39 people is always going to be a tragic piece of news, and we've heard reaction from the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, of course, to that effect as well. But of course, this will play into discussions as well about the plight of people who are trying to get into the United Kingdom. It's conjecture at the moment and speculation as to who the victims might be and why they might be have been in the back of that lorry. But it's most likely because of the origin of the lorry and because of the routes taken into the country that it is possibly a question either of migrants trying to get into the country and or people smuggling. And in that sense, the police are very much going to be looking for whoever is responsible for transporting people in this way. Obviously, just to think about the journey that would have been taken even had those people not died in the lorry, just the journey itself would be somewhat horrific. 39 people in the back of a sealed truck. The fact that, of course, they've all ended up dead is also just adds another element to it. And it's really shocking that people are now finding out about this. There's a general sense of shock and tragedy about the news.
Certainly is awful. Jonathan, stay with me. I want to move on to another topic now, to the ongoing Brexit drama, where British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has met with Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn after another dramatic night on the floor of the House of Commons, which saw Johnson's Brexit plan to fast-track a bill rejected by members of Parliament. The meeting coming amid great uncertainty as to what comes next, with Johnson adamant that he doesn't want the Brexit deadline of October 31st extended by the European Union. And Jonathan, tell me, whose move is next? Is it the UK's or the EU's?
Well, a lot of moving parts in this equation at the moment. Obviously, the extension from the EU is something that needs to be considered, and the EU seeming to give the indication that while it will give a flexible extension, that shouldn't go past the end of January. But in the meantime, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, and Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Labour Party, have been in discussions about possible timetabling for the procedure of pushing through the deal that Boris Johnson brought back from Brussels into law. Obviously, Boris Johnson wanted that to take place over 3 days at breakneck speed, and that was rejected by Parliament. But at this stage, we now can see that the two of them have been meeting, and those meetings are broken up. And Downing Street's pushing the possibility now of a general election after those talks between the two leaders on a new timetable didn't seem to arrive at any mutually agreed conclusion. But it's not necessarily the case that Jeremy Corbyn will grant him an election, because as UK law stands today, Boris Johnson, as the leader of a minority government, simply can't call a general election on his own. He needs to get a two-thirds majority for that in the House of Commons, and that would mean that Mr Corbyn needs to vote with him, or at least many in the Labour Party do. There are perhaps a few ways in which he could circumvent that, something called a notwithstanding motion, notwithstanding the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. Boris Johnson could say he wishes to bring an early election, and that might then just rely on a simple majority in Parliament to bring about an election. We'll have to wait and see, though.
We certainly will. Jonathan, Sasha Dotty there. I'm sure we'll be talking Brexit sometime soon. Thank you so much. Now, when you think of tourist attractions in the Bronx, the zoo or Yankee Stadium probably comes to mind. But thanks to the movie The Joker, people from far and wide are flocking to the borough for something else. The next report takes a look.
Well, if you're from the Bronx, the step streets like the one here on Shakespeare Avenue are nothing new, but many people around the world saw them for the first time in the Joker movie and are flocking to these particular steps to get that perfect Instagram picture. The movie offers insight into the background of the Joker, played by Joaquin Phoenix. The over 130 steps are featured heavily as the Joker descends into villainy, causing the stairs themselves to ascend into the spotlight.
Oh yeah, this is my first time even being over here, but wow.
Today I was debating to go between the Statue of Liberty or the stairs, and look where I decided to come.
People from the Bronx and around the city and the world now heading to Shakespeare Avenue and 167th Street to snag that Instagram-worthy pic.
I like to get far shots of it, you know.
I know they say that it's one of the best attractions in New York right now. I wanted to check it right before it's still not so crowded.
While some Bronxites have taken to social media side-eyeing the fact that people, and briefly Google Maps, called this spot the Joker Stairs and are skeptical to the tourist attention to the area, those here today say they're happy to see their neighborhood in the limelight.
Wow, always is to get people. It's nice.
About time, it's just a matter of time. This beautiful attraction, New York is an icon,
for the world to come see.
Now politicians are hoping all this attention leads to funding to maintain these step streets. Councilwoman Vanessa Gibson sending out this tweet yesterday saying her office is looking for $8 million to rehab the steps. In Highbridge, Gianna Gelosi, News 12.
And that is all we have time for. I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for watching.